So, today we're going to break down a fascinating case study in modern politics. It's all about the alleged strategy to build a political heir in Turkey. Now, according to the sources we're looking at, this is a story that involves massive public spectacles, some really powerful backroom machinery, and maybe most importantly, a plan to rewrite the very rules of the game. Let's get into how it all supposedly works. What makes this whole thing so interesting is the starting point. You see, Turkish political culture, according to our sources, has this deep-seated allergy to inherited power. Historically, being the son of a famous leader, that's actually more of a hurdle than a help. A famous last name might get your foot in the door, sure, but it's not going to make you a leader. The culture just isn't built for it. And that right there is the central puzzle. If the public is instinctively against the whole idea of you, what's the playbook? Well, the strategy we're about to unpack isn't really about winning hearts and minds. It's about creating a system where hearts and minds become kind of irrelevant. Okay, so the first part of that strategy kicks off with creating a massive, unavoidable public stage. Let's start with the spectacle, an event that's just designed to be seen by everyone, and it's held on Istanbul's iconic Galata Bridge. Now, this is not just some random protest. The sources describe it as a really carefully crafted ritual. For 3 years in a row, on the very first day of the year, this famous bridge becomes the backdrop for a huge rally. And that repetition is absolutely key. It's designed to turn a political demonstration into something that feels more like a national tradition. Now, get this. Organizers claimed a staggering 520,000 people showed up to the last rally. It's really important to note, though, that critics say no way, and they widely dispute that figure. But honestly, regardless of the exact number, the goal is pretty clear. Project an image of overwhelming, undeniable public support. And here, you can really see the two completely different stories at play. On the surface, officially, this is a rally for Gaza, an issue with broad emotional support that organizers frame as being above politics. But for critics, this is pure political theater. They see a carefully staged, made-for-TV event designed to elevate one person, Bilal Erdoğan, using a cause that's almost impossible to publicly oppose. So the crucial point here is that this stage is highly selective. Pro-government groups, they get the green light to use this prime real estate. But when the main opposition party wanted to hold its own pro-Palestinian rally on the very same bridge, permission was denied. The sources also point out that potential rivals, other people who might have an eye on a post-Erdoğan preacher, were conspicuously missing. It all suggests less of a spontaneous gathering and more of a tightly controlled, curated event. Which, leads us to the next logical question. A spectacle on this scale doesn't just happen. So who's actually pulling the strings behind the scenes? All right, so let's pull back the curtain and look at the second layer of this strategy, the machinery. This isn't about the big public show anymore. This is about the vast institutional networks that provide the money, the people, and the ideological backbone for this whole project. And right at the heart of this machinery is an organization called TÜGVA, the Turkey Youth Foundation. It's this hugely influential conservative youth organization, and no surprise, Bilal Erdoğan is on its high advisory board. This is not just a youth club, it's a key organizer of these massive rallies and a really powerful tool for building a grassroots network across the country. The strategy behind an organization like TÜGVA is basically a 3-step playbook. First, you build a loyal base from the ground up, connecting with young people, teachers, and religious figures. Second, you use these platforms to frame the candidate not just as a politician, but as the true heir to an ideological mission. And third, you give him invaluable, hands-on experience in leadership and management, all away from the harsh glare of the main political spotlight. Now, this machinery of influence doesn't just stop with youth groups. It extends into one of the most powerful social forces in Turkey, football. You have to understand, in Turkey, football isn't just a game. It's a massive channel for identity, community, and, of course, political signaling. Just take a look at this recent example, a nationwide high school football tournament organized by TÜGVA. The launch event for this thing was an absolute masterclass in political optics. You have Bilal Erdoğan standing shoulder to shoulder with the Minister of Sports, the head of the entire Turkish Football Federation, the national team coach, and even reps from the biggest clubs. It's this powerful image that visually fuses state power, the nation's biggest sport, and this youth foundation into one unified front. So, okay, we've got the spectacle and we've got the machinery. But the sources we're looking at argue that the deepest layer of this strategy, the real core of it, goes way beyond PR. It's about fundamentally changing the political system itself. This quote from our source material really gets to the absolute heart of the argument. The idea is, if the culture is against you, you don't try to win a popularity contest. No. You change the rules of the contest itself. You engineer a system where the public's allergy to dynasties, well, it just doesn't matter anymore. And according to these sources, you can actually trace this systemic engineering over several key years. It arguably kicks off in 2017 with the referendum that created a hyper-centralized presidency. Then comes 2019, when an opposition victory in the crucial Istanbul mayor's race was just canceled and rerun. It sent a clear message: a win isn't final until the system says it is. Fast forward to 2023, and the opposition was calling the general election the most unfair in years. And just recently, a private meeting between the president and the country's top election official has only fueled more questions about the entire process.
But this isn't just a domestic story. The sources also point to what they call external lubricants. And what that means are international factors, the interests and actions of other countries, that can actually make it easier for a political project like this to succeed back home.
I mean, listen to this quote from a U.S. envoy. It is incredibly revealing. It suggests a potential shift in thinking among some Western powers, away from the messy, complicated business of promoting democracy, and maybe towards favoring stable, predictable rulers, even if they aren't democratic. And for a country like Turkey, that is a powerful international signal. And this table here really breaks down that whole external calculation. For Western allies and NATO, the sources argue Turkey is just too important on issues like migration and defense to risk any instability. The result is this kind of quiet acceptance of the status quo. From another angle, you have signaling from figures like Donald Trump, which basically tells the inner circle that continuity will be rewarded, not punished. And finally, some regional players simply prefer a predictable strongman to the uncertainty of democracy. All these external pressures can make a dynastic project seem a whole lot less risky. So, where does all of this lead? Well, the final pieces of the puzzle suggest a vision that extends even beyond the next generation. The last bit of evidence, according to the sources, wasn't just another photo op. They interpret it as something way more significant, a public rehearsal for the third generation of a potential dynasty. And this is where the long-term thinking really comes into focus. The president's grandson was recently given a speaking role at a major international forum, right there alongside his grandfather. Now, if you looked at that in isolation, it might seem minor. But when you place it in the context of everything else we've talked about, the huge rallies for the sun, the deep changes to the political system, our sources interpret this as a very deliberate signal that a multi-generational succession pipeline is being built. So we end right back where we began, with this fundamental question. On one side, you have a political culture that is deeply allergic to the idea of inherited power. On the other side, you have a political system that is being systematically engineered to bypass that very same culture. In that clash, which force is ultimately going to win? That's the question this whole story leaves us with.